Hello, reader. Thank you for joining us. This is the Christian Readers Community Podcast. On this podcast, we will be discussing with fellow readers and authors. You will never lack for good conversations and recommendations of Christian books. If you're a lover of literary works, fiction and non-fiction, then you have made the right stop here. Thank you for joining us again.
Author Joan T. retired from occupational therapy, but just can't stop spreading health, inspiration, and tidbits for life via story, because story reaches hearts where we most need a loving touch. An addictions minister and an occupational therapist for families with special needs, Joan brings to her writing the dynamics of recovering from abuse and neglect with what it takes to create a healthy life and family. She affirms what is good at heart and relationships, and in so doing inspires readers into a healthier journey for their own lives and the world around. Whether by fiction, nonfiction, journals, or children's literature, Joan enjoys using story to help us drop our masks, connect, find inspiration, and lead future generations to a better life and world.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Christian Readers Community. My name is Faith and I have with me an amazing lady. She wrote this very bulky book, a historical fiction, but I have to mention the word bulky because when you're reading a very good book, it doesn't matter how bulky it is. It's going to grab your attention from the beginning till the end. So I sat down for hours reading this book and I was like, wow, I couldn't stop even when I wanted to because I just kept wanting to know what was happening. It's a very, very beautiful story. The Bent Three Parts by Joan T. Welcome to the show, Joan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And I really love your book, really. And I can't wait for the next installment in the series.
I am so excited that you love my book. And that's been my heart's cry all the time, is that I'll be able to craft a story that will do exactly what you said, engage the reader, take you deeper, make you want to turn every page until you devour all of it. So I'm so blessed that you feel that way about it and that you want to share this with your audience.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so without wasting much time, let's talk about you. When did your love for writing develop?
Oh, I was young. You hear that a lot, I'm sure, from your writers, but as a youngster, it just always was something that I loved to do. But of course, approaching the career age, everyone says, no, you cannot survive on a writer's income. So choose something smarter. Well, I really did think about starting with journalism or something, but I ended up going a different way and then coming back to writing as a love in my later years.
And I guess it has been a rewarding time for you.
Yes.
Tell us about your book, The Bent Three Parts.
Well, this is a story. It's, as you noted, it's an interesting and long story. It's not one that's easy to tell in short format. It's a story that spans generations, and it has its roots in some Cherokee history here in America, where I don't know if all the readers are familiar, but in the mid-1800s, we had something called the Great Removal. Well, I don't think it was so great, but they decided to move all of what they called Native Americans at the time, but I don't know, maybe we weren't even America at the time. Anyway, they were the indigenous people, and they wanted to move them west so that we could have their land, basically. And so there was forced removal, and it was very brutal. The Trail of Tears in particular was a time during the winter where thousands and thousands of people were forced to walk on foot in many cases, and they call it the trail where they cried. They just lost so many people along the way. And so this story has always intrigued me, always broken my heart. It was probably the first thing I learned in history that made me feel ashamed to be in my country. It's a sad thing to say, but I think that we're moving and progressing as a country. And one of the things that we are doing as we progress is share stories that matter. So I will into this story not only some of the history of the Trail of Tears and how it affected one of our characters' grandparents, but also, and her family, also that intergenerational carrying forward of trauma. So we meet Lena. She's in the early 1900s. She's coming from a good family in a rural area of Maryland, which is actually not far from where they always believed the historic Uncle Tom's Cabin was. There was a Quaker settlement there, and they freed slaves well before they were ever asked to do so. And so it was a really nurturing community. And so she runs into some issues that we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But the other half of the story that's interwoven is in the Vietnam War protest era in the 70s and then the 80s, where we're watching Becca, who's a young teen from a very different family, a very dysfunctional, abusive family. And she becomes a single teen mom and goes on a journey to try to make things better for her future and for her family in the future.
So what inspired you to delve into the historical and emotional depths of the Trail of Tears? Interweaving the lives in this book like that of Becky and Lena.
Right. Well, like I said, that was a heartbreaking event, and I wanted to know more about it. I did spend a lot of time in my life learning about the Cherokee people. It was just very interesting to me. When I envisioned the story of the Bent Tree Path, the ancestral research that I did nourished those stories, and they seemed to fit together. They really made sense together. And so the Cherokee people are an important part of the whole story. That story, overall, the series tackles some of the most invasive and pervasive types of trauma and suffering in an intergenerational fashion. And then the ethnic oppression that they suffered still affects all of them today. It plays a large part in our woundedness as a country. Statistics that I learned along the way, like in the aftermath, they're just staggering. Like 84% of Native women in this country experience violence in their lifetime. And Indigenous peoples have rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that is similar to the level of our combat victims. So when I added that to our most recent United States Census, it showed that nearly 10 million Americans claim to have Indigenous ancestry, at least in part. And the biggest part of that is actually Cherokee. Now, some people scoff at those figures and they think we're all imagining that we're just listening to our old grandma's tales. But actually, if you do the math, even though the numbers, they almost died as a nation, it's actually quite possible at this point in the generational explosion, the way that math can work. And that's a lot of people who share an ancestral memory, a lot of people whose DNA may even hold the trauma responses that are crying out for healing and for justice. So you can see then how I started thinking that Lena's grandmother, being Cherokee, coming into this area in Maryland with her wounds and hiding her true identity to protect her family, that could innocently and unknowingly, inadvertently end up leading to Lena keeping secrets. And those secrets, the secretive lives, make fertile ground for predators.
Wow. Well, like you've mentioned earlier, your story spans across different timelines, 1971 and 1917. Tell us, what were the challenges and rewards of writing across such distinct threads?
Well, that's a good question. I researched extensively and became fascinated with the early 1900s. That was the first challenge because in school I wasn't even interested in history, but now I am. So it was really fun to me when I thought we were ready to enter into another roaring 20s, say in the 21st century in 2020. But as you know, we were all surprised with the pandemic instead. So it took a lot of research for me to be aware of all these aspects, cultural, regional, educational, political, and other influences in the era. But it was a really worthwhile journey, and I hope that I've represented things adequately and well. And then for the 70s and 80s, I lived during that era. So I could easily pull from memory. I was in the area that I wrote from too at that time. I could pull from experiences without many research questions, but certainly there were some. And then another one of the challenges was actually holding on to my vision for how important these two were to be interwoven into the story. Several consultants that I talked with along the way suggested that I write a separate novel for each of my protagonists. I tried that, but because it would help keep the word count down, like you said, it wouldn't be such a bulky story. But in the end, I decided that they really needed to be interwoven for many reasons. And I went with my gut, and it turned out to be the right one. So many readers have told me that it was so important. And one person even said, if it wasn't for Lena, I would have quit reading because Becca always kept making so many bad choices. I was just getting mad at her. I mean, that's just stuff. So I do think that they play off each other, and they send a message of intergenerational trauma in the end that I think, and recovery, that I think is very important.
Yeah. Do you know that if you had written, one of their stories, or if you had divided both stories into two books, I think it would still make sense. But really, writing a dual timeline story was just perfect. And yeah, it was really, really beautiful. I just, when you take me to the story of Lena, I was like, okay, please stay here a little bit longer. And then you just keep us hanging, just leave it on a cliffhanger. Then you move over to that of the story of Becky. And oh boy, like the whole thing was just wonderful up until the end. Like I said earlier, it was a bulky book, but when I got to the end, I wished I never did.
Oh, well, there's another one coming.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that one. Now, both Becca and Lena, who are your main characters in this story, faced different but equally profound challenges. How did you develop their characters? And what do you hope readers will take away from each of their characters?
Another good question. It took me years to develop this whole series. I incorporated my knowledge of personality types. I'm a trained occupational therapist, and I used to be an addictions counselor before that. So I mostly use the Myers-Briggs type inventory. People know that as the MBTI. I've always loved this one because it helped me personally recognize and accept the value of my own personality and my preferences. And also it helped me with accepting and understanding other people better in all types of life situations. So when I used the MBTI, I chose a personality type for each one of the characters, and it helped me define their voice, their perceptions, their decisions, and their personalities overall. So they do have a lot in common. Like, they're both essentially loving and kind people. I think their most significant difference is how they were raised and how their brains were wired while they were developing as children. So you can see that being raised in a loving home, like Lena was, helps, but it doesn't necessarily prevent a person from being a victim. Being a victim can happen to anybody. So each protagonist in the story needs to be active and really to be a hero. So as I developed their character arcs, they each needed to come to their highest selves. So I use the Enneagram, if you're familiar with that. The Enneagram is another way of studying personality, and it has progression charts that shows you how people tend to take on different parts of the chart that make up the whole personalities as they progress in their life. So I use that to help each character develop a believable path of development in the story. And what do I hope that readers take away from it? There's a lot of hope in this. There's deeper awareness of the broad and deep and lasting impact of trauma and shame and victimhood. I hope that they embrace the value of making difficult choices to move out of being a victim into being an overcomer. I hope that they get inspiration and hope for themselves, so that there won't be any doubt that love at a deep spiritual level has the power to transform life, and that transformation can resound well beyond you as the individual. And I hope that your readers are inspired, if they need to take the time to heal, to dig deeper into their subconscious false beliefs and let the Holy Spirit do his work to renew them from the inside out. That's just a short hope list, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't hope for much, right?
No, I really, I'm going to ask you a related question to what you've, just answered. I know you've said a little from it when you talked about transformation. Now I'm going to ask you this question. In your book, you explored themes of intergenerational drama and resilience. Now, how did these themes evolve as you wrote the story? And how do you relate it to your characters, especially Lena and Becca?
Yes. Thank you for your adeptness in teasing out these themes in the story. You're really good at that.
Thank you.
So like I said earlier, I did set out to tell an intergenerational story. So in some ways, it wasn't evolving as much as I realized I had to break it into a whole series. But certainly my understanding of the scope of it grew as I researched and fleshed all of the ideas out more fully. I love that you mentioned resilience, because resilience is one of the biggest factors that science has identified that can actually come from suffering and from struggling. So as we develop resilience, we become more overcomers. Instead of shrinking, we can learn much better strategies for managing stress, and we can pass those strategies on. And even, I mentioned DNA earlier. DNA, if you think of it, when you were formed in your mother's womb, the eggs that are formed while you're in your mother's womb, her eggs were formed in her mother's womb. So those ovaries, our DNA was actually in our grandmother at the time that, she conceived our mother. And so they're showing that the way that our grandmothers responded to trauma and stress is imprinted in our DNA. And so can something like resilience. So when we do make changes, we can actually and we do it early in life, it's even better, because we can be passing on strengths to our children, even in our DNA. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really. You once said earlier that growing up, you didn't have any interest for history, but you've perfectly written this book, this dual historical book or dual timeline historical book. Now, what kind of research did you put into accurately portraying the historical and emotional landscape of the Trail of Tears and its aftermath?
Well, when I first began researching the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee people, there wasn't any such thing as the internet. I remember I visited my aging aunt. She was pretty old by then. She was the only family survivor at the time who still had really happy memories of spending her earliest years with her grandmother, who she said was Cherokee. Now, I know a lot of people say, I had a Cherokee grandmother, but her stories were so vivid and so rich, and I just was captivated with them. And I sought to find out more about that break, and what happened and how we lost the records and things like that. And so I ordered books. I went to Cherokee, North Carolina, to the library there, and read and absorbed everything I could on site there. I ordered more books. I went back. I visited the museum there in Cherokee, North Carolina several times, read and listened to their stories. They have storytellers there. I got to watch their children playing, and they play stickball, and I saw the women making baskets, and I had the opportunity to meet someone who's their beloved man. His name was Jerry Wolf. They don't appoint very many people with that title, but Jerry Wolf was a veteran of World War II who came back to Cherokee and invested his later years in really teaching the young people all of their traditions to carry that on. So I got to meet him and sit with him and hear him tell Cherokee stories firsthand before he passed away a couple of years ago. Let's see, what else did I do? And then as the internet, gave us more readily accessible information, I found more records and made connections with people who belong to the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma and the Eastern Tribe of Cherokee in North Carolina. I watched their videos that they share, interacted with them on social media. And then I even got to connect with a fellow author who's Cherokee, and he did some sensitivity reading for me to ensure that I was honoring to them as a people.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's wonderful the kind of research you put into this, considering the fact that there was no internet at the time you started researching this book. That means you started researching about this book for over 30 years now, right?
Well, yeah, I did actually. I didn't realize I was researching a book time. I was just following my heart and my interests.
Oh, wow. Oh. And finally, your search finally led you to writing a book. I wish I could ask you more questions, but we are out of time. Oh my, you have a copy of the book there with you. We would like to hear an excerpt.
Okay, let's see. Since we've talked a lot about Cherokee, I'm going to go forward here into that section where we really start to meet. Caroline might be a good one.
Okay.
In this section of the Bent Tree Path, Lena is visiting her great-aunt Caroline in the Appalachian Mountains, and she's starting to learn more about the history of her family, things she never knew before. The reading starts on page 249 in the paperback version. But we two girls, we stayed hidden. They didn't find us. It wasn't till many years later we learned what happened to our people, to our parents. Lena interrupted. Your parents? I thought you said they hid with you and raised you in the mountains. For a while they did, until one night they didn't come back. Later, Uncle Ezekiel admitted he thought they were caught up by a posse and taken west, but we never knew for sure. We stayed hidden with him for years after that. Years? You grew up hiding in the mountains? She nodded. Until we were old enough to marry instead of being taken in as slaves. Our tribe fought the old wars with some of the better whites. Ezekiel knew some of them all up and down the mountains from Georgia to Connecticut. He knew which folks to trust and which not, after they enforced blood law. He arranged... Blood law? Lena asked. What's that? Oh, my dear. Caroline took a deep breath. Cherokee blood law said if anyone traded away our land, they'd pay with their life. So 3 of our leaders who signed the treaty that started the Trail of Tears were killed, all on the same day. Oh, I didn't know any of this. Were they our relatives? Is that why Granny moved near Washington? Is that why she hides her Cherokee? My mouth's drier than Gatlin's jokes. Aunt Caroline took another sip of tea. That's a long story you're asking. For tonight, I'll say that Uncle arranged our marriages, although not together. My sister can tell you more once you're home. The room grew quiet, amplifying natural background sounds. The family breathed. A lone cricket chirped from outside the window. The short bursts punctuated by the sound of rain droplets joining a puddle as they released their hold on the roof's edge. Do you think it still hurts when she recalls it? Who? Eliza? Could be. She is strong. She can handle you asking. Caroline brushed a tear aside. It does hurt to think about again, but where love is, one can bear it.
I think it was really a nice collision between the cultures as she began to learn about that.
Yeah. And I really love this part when she moved over to her grandmother's place to learn more about herself and discover something very intriguing about her family and where she came from. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate, the fact that you were willing to read for us. So tell us quickly, what should we expect from your next book or the next book in this series? Because I know there's another series. I haven't read an excerpt at the end of the story.
Yes, I'd love to share a little glimpse. In The Bent Tree Path, Book 2, we'll jump forward another 50 years to present day. Becca's about to retire, but she still has some important work to do. But the main spotlight is going to switch to her adult granddaughter, who will ramp up some suspense in a fight for justice. Our ties to the Cherokee will continue too in an interesting way. And then after that, we'll have a third book that is going to be a prequel and take us back before the Trail of Tears. So whether you love contemporary or historical fiction, stay with me. I've got a lot of heart-to-heart stories in the works. You also might want to know about a nonfiction book that might help with digging into those beliefs. It's called My Road to Recovery, a 12-week guided journal for inner healing. And that's also available through Amazon.
So anyone who goes on Amazon, the person will be able to search for your book, The Trail of Tears.
Yes, it's called The Tree Path, A Secret Trail of Tears. It's not actually called The Trail of Tears, so that would be helpful to help them find it. And I also have a blog they can find me, which is www.joantwarren.com.
All right, thank you so much, Joan, and thank you everyone for listening. And Joan, I do hope that when I invite you next time, you'd be willing to come again, because I would definitely love to read the second book in the series. So I hope when I invite you, you'd be willing to come again.
Of course, I'm really happy to share this with you, and I'm really happy that you love the book. Of course, that's my heart is that people will be touched by it. So.
Yeah, and it's really touching people. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening. And until I come your way again next time, I'm saying stay safe, stay blessed, and bye bye everyone.